if you put, 29% beta glucan or 2% triterpene, it needs to actually be in there, right? It needs to be tested by third-party labs and stuff like that. So if that is on the label, chances are it's a good product, right?
Okay.
So that's the other thing that you look for. You want to make sure you see those compounds actually listed on the label. Um, the other thing to look out for is if there's, I've seen some products that are like 1,000 to 1 extraction ratio,
Hmm.
which really makes no sense because how you calculate an extraction ratio is you take the bulk mass of mushrooms and how much like end product of extract you actually got out. So, for example, a reishi mushroom, it's pretty dense. So once you do the extraction and it's just alcohol and hot water extracted powder, it might be like a 8 to 1 or 16 to 1 ratio, and that doesn't change that much. But if it was 1,000 to 1 ratio, all that means is it took you way, way, way more mushrooms to get your extract, and it's just
Ah.
super inefficient.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Mushroom Podcast. Today's guest is Tony Shields, founder and CEO of the mushroom-based wellness company FreshCap. Tony is the real deal, folks. His knowledge on functional mushrooms is deep and expansive and stems all the way back to a childhood fascination with fungi. So, if you want to learn about the medicinal and healing properties of various mushrooms, what to look out for when buying mushroom supplement products, and even how to grow your own at home, this episode is for you guys. So enjoy this extremely educational conversation with Tony, and don't forget to check out his company over at freshcap.com. Thanks for joining us, Tony.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm super stoked to be here.
Yeah, I feel like we gotta immediately address the massive mushroom on the wall behind you. Let's talk about that thing because that's magnificent.
Yeah, so this is a giant reishi, also known as Ganoderma lucidum. Some of your listeners might know that reishi is a super popular medicinal mushroom, one of the most popular in the world, but they're not usually this big. This one is about, for the listeners anyway, about 2.5 feet wide. It weighs about 11 pounds,
Wow.
and it's mounted on the wall. It's super cool. So typically they're a lot smaller. Like they might be, this is one that I'm holding in my hand here that's grown for cultivation, and it's maybe about, 10 inches wide, and that's even pretty big. But
Yeah.
yeah, the massive one behind me on the wall is a novelty.
Yeah, that's quite a specimen back there.
It's pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, beautiful. Okay, so let's get into the story a little bit about Tony Shields, the human. How did mushrooms become such a big part of your life? Take us back to when that curiosity began.
Yeah, so I've been interested in mushrooms my entire life for whatever reason, and I've never really understood why. Like I've always just been fascinated by, watching them grow in the woods. I've always gone and looked for them. I've always thought they were, cool. I've always been interested in growing them, even as a young kid, right? Like I would ask my mom if she could take me to the garden center and buy a mushroom kit, like a mushroom growing kit, and that wasn't even something that existed. So it's like, well, what are you talking about? Maybe we can get you a flower or something. But obviously that passion eventually led to where we are today. But my entire life been super interested in mushrooms, growing mushrooms, and it's been amazing to see that over the years I've learned that other people also share that passion. So, where that passion kind of led to where we are today, I started eventually growing mushrooms, just on a small scale at home. And I thought while I was doing that, I might as well kind of teach other people what I'm learning just to see if anybody else might be interested. So I started freshcapmushrooms.com, started blogging about how I was growing mushrooms and all the things that I was learning. And I tell you, I was an inch away from deleting the website because I didn't want to pay the $10 a month or $15 a month hosting fees.
Right.
But instead of doing that, I installed some analytics just to see, what was going on, if anybody was actually going to the website. And my jaw hit the floor. I was like blown away by the amount of people that were actually visiting the website, that were learning how to grow mushrooms. And it just kind of took off from there. I thought, wow, there's a real opportunity here. There's a real community, and I want to be a part of it. So we just continue to keep growing that.
Oh man, I love that. So close, like that $10 to $15 a month when you're not making money, right? I'm a frugal guy myself, and whenever I see like a little bit of money going out, but there's nothing coming in, it's like, yeah, what am I? That I get that like analyzation of being like, or analysis to be like, yeah, maybe we need to cut this off. But that's a great start to the business. It's a great
Well,
story.
it's just funny too, because I did a Reddit post that you could probably dig up. It was like from 6 or 7 years ago. That was like, these are my analytics. Like, what do you guys think? Should I delete this website? And people are like, nah, man, like keep going. You're getting traffic. That's cool. I was like, okay, I guess whatever. I'll stick to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy I kept going with it. That's for sure.
Yeah, humble beginnings. That's great. So you're in Edmonton, Alberta,
Yep,
correct?
we're based out of Edmonton, Alberta.
And did you grow up there?
Yeah, I grew up between Edmonton and Grand Prairie, so kind of been around Alberta all my life. And yeah, it's actually not a bad place to be for mushrooms. And it's we can talk about this later, but it's actually looks like it's starting to evolve in a bit of a hub
Really?
for mushrooms in particular, which is really cool. And again, just happy to be part of that.
And is that on like the cultivation side? What do you mean by a hub for mushrooms?
So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in mushrooms right now, especially around like the psilocybin space. And
Mm.
there is going to be a enormous psilocybin growing facility in the Edmonton area. It's going to be one of the biggest in the world. So I mean, when I heard that, I was just like, that's really cool. Like out of all the places in the world, why is Edmonton, Alberta, potentially going to be a hub?
Mm.
And FreshCap is here, so we're a bit of an anchor in the mushroom community as well in Edmonton.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
not
And so
such a bad place.
you mentioned that that is not a bad place for mushrooms in general. So did you kind of grow up foraging and looking for mushrooms?
Not entirely, because I mean, still in Canada and North America in general, we're still kind of a mycophobic society, right?
Hmm.
So it's not a very common thing at all to go hunting for mushrooms, maybe in smaller circles, but definitely not when I was growing up. But I just, it's almost like looking for Pokemon or something. Like it's just really exciting walking around in the woods, especially in the mountains. I lived in
Yeah.
Fernie, British
Ah,
Columbia for a
nice.
while, and just finding mushrooms and seeing what they do, and not necessarily like learning the Latin names or how to identify them, but just like looking at them, checking them out, and seeing what they're like. And I think the thing that really blew my mind early on was I found out that some mushrooms are nutritious and delicious. Some mushrooms will take you on a crazy adventure mentally, and other mushrooms will literally kill you. So like, there's the whole spectrum of them, and there's just such an amazing world to learn about. So it's endlessly fascinating,
Mm.
and I'm still kind of fascinated every day by the mushrooms all around us.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. They're very all very like unique and confusing to me. I'm just scratching the surface of myself, and I've been watching a ton of your YouTube videos. Your 30 for 30 that you did was amazing.
Awesome.
Trying to remember some of those Latin names. I saw you guys put up that funny meme about Latin names today, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's great. That's very on point. Uh, so now I know that you guys it's kind of funny for us out here on the west coast of Canada. I'm on Vancouver Island. It's a huge mushroom culture out here. I think we kind of have like a great climate for it on the west coast here with all the rain that we get and all the rainforests that we have here. So I was kind of thinking like, oh, but people who have mushroom companies in Canada would get their mushrooms from the west coast, like Vancouver Island, right? Like maybe Washington State. But that's not the case for where the best mushrooms in the world grow.
Yeah. So I mean, I mean, people obviously want mushrooms from Canada or where they're from, and there's this idea that maybe that's where the best mushrooms are from. But it's not quite true. It's similar to like, for example, if you go to Starbucks or if you want to get the best coffee in the world, right?
Mm,
You would expect the coffee to come from Colombia or Tanzania or like one
mm,
of these regions that grows the best coffee in the world. And really no mushrooms, mushrooms are no different. There is regions in the world where you can get the best mushrooms ever because there's the history, there's the infrastructure, there's the climate, there's the generational knowledge to grow those mushrooms and how to use them as well. And the best mushrooms in the world grow in Southeast China. And I've been there
mm.
myself, I've experienced it myself, I've seen it myself. It's just so well ingrained into the culture. And you go to some of these reishi farms, like for example, where they can grow things like this, and you ask them like, well, how did you get into this? How did you learn how to grow reishi? And they're like, well, my father grew reishi and his
Mm,
father grew reishi and well, his father. So it's just like this
right.
generational knowledge that gets passed down. And there's a certain amount of care that goes into it as well because of the how ingrained not just growing the mushrooms is, but the medicine factor of the mushrooms is part of the culture because they've been using it for quite literally thousands of years.
Right.
So some of these places you go to, like there's mushrooms everywhere and like statues of mushrooms and the garbage cans look like mushrooms and everybody knows them, everybody uses them. And that results in the most amazing mushrooms in the world, which is why we work with a lot of growers from there to produce our mushrooms.
Wow. Wow, that's yeah, that's I mean it makes a ton of sense to know like, when you really think about that generational history passed down and down. Everybody knows about the Eastern Chinese medicine, right? So
Right.
that's really the origin story and roots for mushrooms. So the medicinal benefits. Let's speak to that a little bit. I know a very popular mushroom that a lot of people are using, especially if we're going to talk about psilocybin and stacking with different mushrooms, is lion's mane. So what's so special about lion's mane?
Yeah, so I like to think of each mushroom as kind of having its own superpower, right? And that's the one really unique thing about mushrooms is you can characterize the different mushrooms as like what they will do for you or what your sidekick or superhero will be. And basically, no matter who you are, no matter where you're coming from, no matter what issue or goal you're trying to solve there's very likely a mushroom to help you get there. So you mentioned lion's mane. That's a great place to start. Lion's mane is one of the most popular medicinal mushrooms in the world. It's also a delicious gourmet mushroom. So even if you don't want any medicinal benefits out of it whatsoever, if you can find fresh lion's mane and eat it, enjoy it, like I know you're going to love it. It's also
Mm,
easy to grow. But lion's mane is known as the cognitive mushroom or the brain mushroom.
mm,
And lion's mane has compounds in it called hericenones and erinacines. And
mm.
these compounds are amazingly unique. This dynamic duo can actually cross the blood-brain barrier, and it increases something called nerve growth factor, or NGF, which is a compound that both supports, protects, and helps to grow neurons. And all nerve cells really, but neurons in particular, which is why people have so many amazing experiences with focus, with memory, with cognition, with mood, and also with immunity. So that's why you see lion's mane in coffee or lion's mane in focused beverages, or you're starting to see lion's mane everywhere, people using
Right.
it for those potential cognitive benefits.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's got that great name, lion's mane, right? Like you hear it, you're like,
Exactly.
oh, it sounds powerful. I want some of that in my body.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the other name for it is pom pom, which
Right.
is not necessarily nearly as powerful as lion's mane. And the
It's exactly
scientific
what it
name,
looks like.
it's exactly what it looks like. And I wish I had one here with me, but I
Ah.
don't. But yeah, for your people listening to this, it looks like a snowball or a
Hmm.
lion's mane or a pom pom.
Yeah. What does it feel like?
So it's kind of
I've
like
never touched one.
spongy. I mean, it depends if it's dry or not, but if you get it fresh, it's kind of a little bit spongy and it kind of has a texture of like when you cook it up, like kind of similar to crab meat or something.
Okay.
It has a very meaty texture. And the interesting thing about lion's mane is it has teeth instead of gills, right? It's not your typical
Oh.
cap and stem mushroom. So those gills or those teeth, sorry, can get really long and it's a very unique looking mushroom in that way. If you do see it in the wild, it's instantly recognizable, and you'll know right away that it's lion's mane mushroom.
Right. And so the teeth instead of the gills, because so from the gills is where the spores, like where the sporulation process comes from, right? Does that come from the teeth as well, from the lion's mane? Like where does the sporing happen, or how do
Exactly.
lion's mane spread?
So yeah, so all mushrooms, will reproduce by spreading their spores, but lion's mane uses a structure called, I don't know if this is the scientific name for this, but basically it's like a tooth or spine. So
Okay.
most mushrooms will have like a cap, and under the cap will be all the gills where the spores come from, but lion's mane just does it in this big snowball-like formation with these crazy teeth that come out, and that's where the spores come from. And you'll see this if you ever grow lion's mane or see it growing, it will collect the spores all over the place, and you can wipe them up and look at it, and they're these beautiful white spores that come out of the teeth.
Oh, very cool. Man,
Yeah.
amazing, amazing little, I don't know, creatures. I feel like they're like their own species, like alive, and everything they're doing is so fascinating and wild to see. So like, I guess creatures is a good name for mushrooms, but
Well, I mean, that's a good point. They really are their own. I mean, it's the fifth kingdom, right? I mean, they're
right.
not quite animals. They're not quite plants. Some ways they're more similar to humans than they are to plants. Some ways they're more similar to plants than they are to humans, but they really are their own entity, right? And a lot of
Mm,
people think the presence of mushrooms is almost proof of aliens among us, right? Because they're
mm,
different from everything else and they're so amazingly unique. And I think more and more all the time, we're starting to learn how these things are interacting with not just our planet, but with our bodies and the potential that they have. So, yeah, I mean, so many different ways we can go down talking about that, but mushrooms really are fascinating in so many ways.
yeah, no kidding. So what about this reishi back here? What's reishi do for us?
So reishi is known as the mushroom of immortality. The name is Ganoderma lucidum. That's a
Mm,
scientific name. And the name Ganoderma, Gano means shiny, right? And derma means skin. So it means shiny skin. And that's why this one's a little dull because it's been dried for a long time. But typically they're very shiny. It almost looks like it's been polished, right? It's called the
right.
varnished conch. And if we look underneath, reishi doesn't have gills either. It has pores, and that's where the spores come out of. But reishi contains a high amount of fungal beta glucans, which are really good for our immune system. And the fruiting body also contains a high concentration of something called triterpenes,
Mm,
which is a class of compounds that can be used for all sorts of different things. But in reishi in particular, it's used for sleep and for like a calming nature. So that's why it's also known as the spirit mushroom. It kind of calms the spirit. And people like to take reishi at night to kind of help with sleep. But it will also kind of help to modulate the immune system. And the interesting thing about reishi is that it's not just the fruiting body where the beneficial compounds are, it's also in the spores. So you can
oh,
actually collect the spores, you can crack them open through a process to crack them, and inside of the spores it contains lots of amazing beneficial compounds which can be used as well. So that's why sometimes you see fruiting body and spore combinations for medicinal reishi.
oh. And you can just crack them open on your own, or is there like a more scientific process to it?
It's definitely a process. So
Okay.
yeah, the spores are really tough structure. I mean, they can exist in space, for example. So one way to do it is through like CO2 extraction. So it's kind of a process that cracks that open. But you can also do it by running the spores through an ultra fine mill that kind of cracks them open and then allows those compounds to be used. So the
Okay.
other interesting thing about reishi that, if anyone wants to ever use it, you should probably know, is that it needs to be dual extracted.
Mm,
So the beneficial compounds in mushrooms need to be extracted, right? Either through
yes.
hot water, which is like using a tea or something that people would be really familiar with, or through alcohol, which pulls out different compounds.
Mm,
But some mushrooms contain both alcohol soluble and water soluble compounds. Reishi is one of them, which is why you'd want something like a dual extract.
got it. So, I mean, I think in my mind, from what I've, in my experience of mushrooms, is like, well, you just find the edible ones and you just eat the fruiting body, like eat the actual mushroom itself. And why is that not the best way to absorb the benefits of medicinal mushrooms?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start back up all the way between the difference between, say, mycelium and fruiting body.
Yeah.
So you can kind of think of mushrooms as being analogous to, say, an apple tree, where the fruiting body is the apple, right? And the mycelium is kind of the tree.
Right.
The apple or the fruiting body is the part that contains all of those beneficial compounds. It's the stuff with, historical use cases, and it's the stuff that's been used for thousands of years to actually give us those benefits for mushrooms. The mycelium also has some interesting compounds, and you can kind of think of mycelium as like the root structure of
Mm-hmm.
mushrooms, right? But what's happened is a lot of producers will produce something called mycelium on grain. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, they take mushroom mycelium, they grow it out on a grain like rice or oats or rye grain or something like that, and then they grind that up and sell it as a mushroom supplement. The problem is it's very little mycelium and it's mostly grain starch. So it won't
Mm,
have those beneficial compounds. And people will use those kind of products for years and say, well, mushrooms don't do anything. I really don't
mm,
feel it. And that's likely because they've never actually tried medicinal mushrooms before.
right.
So you take it to the next step where you use the fruiting body, right? You dry it out and you powder it and you just ingest the fruiting body. And that will obviously have some benefits. But the problem is our body, our physiology is not built to actually break down those compounds. Mushroom fruiting bodies are made of something called chitin, which is tough. You can think of it kind of like the exterior of a crab shell is also chitin. So it's really tough and it's
Mm,
impossible for our bodies to break that down. So you need to pull those compounds out and make it easy for our bodies to do it. So the way you can do that again is through alcohol extraction or hot water extraction. Hot water extraction is going to pull out fungal beta glucans. Those are compounds that are known to help modulate and support our immune system. And that's why people will make mushroom tea. You
mm,
take slices of fruiting body, you put it in hot water for an hour or so, that will pull out those compounds and make them accessible. And the other way, of course, triterpenes are fat soluble or alcohol soluble, and those need to be pulled out with alcohol. And that's why you see people at home making like an alcohol tincture where they soak the mushroom fruiting body in alcohol for a couple of weeks and then use the tincture droplets. So there's a million different ways you can do
mm,
it. How we do it on a large scale is we take the dried fruiting bodies, we powder them, then we perform a large hot water extraction, then we perform an alcohol extraction, we spray dry those into a fine powder, mix them together, and that's a final dual extracted mushroom product that has all those compounds in it.
Wow. Wow. I had no idea. I mean, I've learned a little bit of this, like from, going through your website and some of your videos in the last few days. I think I'm a little bit shocked of like the process that it goes through, and I make my own mushroom supplements, and my uses with psilocybin, and it's just like take the mushrooms, throw it into a coffee grinder, maybe put it in some tea, and that's it. Just eat them, right? So definitely some more experimenting to be done on my end for to get a little bit more of these medicinal benefits out of my mushrooms.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely, it can get super complex. And again, there's a million different ways to do it. And like people have obviously benefited from not doing extractions, right? Just powdering dry
Right.
mushrooms. There's even been, research studies done on people just eating dried fruiting body of lion's mane, for example, and seeing some benefits. But I think more and more we're learning that what are the compounds inside the mushrooms that actually make the difference? And how do we, maximize our body's utilization of those compounds? And
Right.
that's through an extraction process.
Right. So back to this mycelium on grain versus the fruiting body conversation, because I know this is a big one, and you and I talked about this on Saturday. There's lots of companies out there that are just using mycelium on grain, and going through your website, you guys are very adamant that you are pure fruiting body, not on grain, and that's something I'm also just learning about as well. And so you were saying that the mycelium is then ground up like with the grain, or are they just taking the mycelium, like because like when they're making these other products that are mycelium
Yeah,
based?
no, that's a great question, and it's a major misconception I think in the world of mushrooms because again, the end consumer when they get it, they just say, "Oh, this is lion's mane mushroom, perfect." But what it actually is in a lot of cases is rice grain and a
Yeah.
little bit of lion's mane mushroom mycelium. So to answer your question specifically, no, you can't separate the grain from the mycelium.
Mm.
So it's a really high percentage of grain and a really low percentage of mycelium all together mixed up. And you can tell this like if you get a bunch of different mycelium on grain supplements, if you get chaga, lion's mane, cordyceps, reishi, and you open them all up, they'll all smell the same, they'll all taste the same because they
Mm.
all are basically the same. They're really the grain. And if you like, the reason I found this in the early days and was so blown away by what was going on was because I'm a mushroom cultivator, and
Right.
in the mushroom cultivation process, you start with mycelium and then you expand that onto a sterilized grain, right? And then you break that grain up, put it in another substrate, grow the mushroom fruiting body, and harvest it.
Mm.
And what myceliated grain or mycelium on grain supplements are, they are grain spawn. So it's like an intermediary step in the mushroom growing process. So it's kind of like short circuiting the whole thing
Right.
without actually growing the mushrooms.
Yeah. So it's kind of it's funny to think of the mycelium itself, like without the fruiting body, it is relatively all the same. Like, would I be able to look maybe under a microscope and see the difference of the mycelium between a lion's mane mycelium and like a turkey tail mycelium?
Yeah,
I'm
you
gonna see
would.
a little bit of a difference, but as far as the end product, you know,
Well,
how do I really
actually,
tell?
I mean, that's a good point too. Like the mycelium itself, like
Mm.
we're not anti-mycelium, I guess, because mycelium itself, pure mycelium,
Mm.
does contain some beneficial compounds. So you talk about turkey tail or lion's mane. Yes, the mycelium of those mushrooms
Right.
does contain some beneficial compounds. But when you grow it out on grain, you lose so much of that and you end up
Right.
buying mostly grain. And some people will say, well, the mycelium fully digests the rice or fully digests the oats, but it really doesn't. And you can tell,
Right.
right? You can tell when you're doing this. So another way that some companies do it with like they will grow the mycelium in liquid vat and then you can drain
Mm.
that out and then you just get pure mycelium. And
Ah.
I think, there can obviously be some beneficial compounds in there. Not nearly as much as the fruiting body, obviously, which is why we use it. But
Right.
yeah, I wouldn't say mycelium in itself is bad. Uh, there are some beneficial mycelium, specifically lion's mane, actually.
Okay, and it's just because the mycelium is so intertwined with all the grain that it's impossible, not impossible, but very difficult and probably expensive to completely get just that base mycelium with none of the grain in there. Therefore, you just end up getting a very diluted end product. That's how
That's
it
yeah,
works.
that's a great way to sum it up. And
Yeah.
I would say it would be like impossible to separate it. Like
Mm.
maybe you could do it in a lab setting or something, but like in terms of commercial production, it'd be impossible. And like I wish I had some with me right now, and I do have a video on this where I show you a fully colonized jar of lion's mane grain spawn, and it
Yeah.
looks like it's totally covered in lion's mane mycelium. It looks like completely white or whatever. But then I shake it up and I show you
Uh,
the same bottle, and it looks just like rye grain. Like you can almost see no
right.
mycelium whatsoever.
Mm.
So it's almost like cotton candy that just kind of disperses, and it's mostly grain.
Okay. So in like one of those liter jars, right? Like the liter mason jars, if you had that like you just said, fully white, what would be the percentage of mycelium, just a ballpark percentage of mycelium versus the grain?
That's a good question. I would say, probably 90% grain. It's really hard to
Right.
say, and like how much of that is digested, but in terms of like the volume or the weight, it's very low percentage. And again, you can see this if you ever grow mushrooms, you'll see it once you shake up your grain. And we used to sell grain spawn as well for mushroom growers, people to grow
Mm-hmm.
mushrooms. And we shipped it to them fully colonized, but often by the time they received it, it was shaken up in the mail and whatnot. And
Mm.
they would open the package and look at it and be like, "This isn't grain spawn. This is just grain. What's going on?" And we would say, "No, it's grain
It's in there.
spawn, but it's been broken up. You can just
Yeah.
barely see the mycelium. Like use
Yeah.
it, it'll work." And of course, it does. So
Got it.
yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So, how do I know when I'm buying a product? Because I've looked at FreshCap's products online. I've looked at some other companies, and recently I bought like half a kilo of a lion's mane and turkey tail from like a bulk online, um, store. They're very cheap compared to other higher quality products, but I figured it's cheap. I don't really know a lot. It says it's lion's mane. It says it's turkey tail extract. Like that's all there is written in the ingredients. I think it's yeah, turkey tail extract and then maltodextrin, which is just a binding agent. Correct?
Yeah, maltodextrin actually is not necessarily a binding agent. It's almost like a filler. So
Okay.
um, there's products out there that could contain, 50% plus of maltodextrin, which, maltodextrin is not necessarily bad for you. It's basically just sugar. But like, if you think you're buying mushrooms and you're getting maltodextrin, that could be a very bad thing.
Right.
So it is a way for some companies to get around it. They could say something like, well, this contains 500 milligrams of reishi, for example.
Yeah.
But you might not know that that might be 200 milligrams of maltodextrin and 300 milligrams of reishi. So
Right.
one of the issues, I guess, with the mushroom industry right now, it's like it's not regulated, and
Right.
you could sell a lot of different things and call them mushrooms. So there's no like perfect silver bullet to figure out like, hey, this is going to be a big product, but there are some red flags to look out for if you're shopping for
Yeah.
mushroom supplements that I'd be happy to dig into.
Let's hear him, man. This is why we're here. I want to learn about, I mean, aside from just going and buying FreshCap, which I recommend everybody, does and gives it a try, but how do we really know what we're getting? This is such a huge thing with kind of all the food anything we put into our bodies, right? Like you can go into
Oh,
most stores and you just look at the ingredient list and you're like, what the hell am I actually buying here? Like it's hard to read
it's
through the bullshit.
it's really hard to know, and I don't blame anybody because mushrooms are a complex space. I mean, obviously it's a passion of mine. I've grown mushrooms. I
Yeah.
really understand this stuff, and even me when I was going through it was kind of like bewildered by the number of potential combinations and different extraction methods and all
Mm.
the marketing out there. And there's even been research done on this. Um, so Jeff Chilton, who's the founder of Namex, who they sell B2B mushroom powders,
Yeah.
and they were involved where they actually I don't know if it was Namex that did this, but anyways, they reported on it. Went and bought a bunch of reishi supplements online and then analyzed them to see what was actually in it. And they found 74% of the supplements didn't contain any reishi whatsoever. So the question is, what was actually in there if it wasn't reishi? Um, so yeah, I think like a lot of people can sell anything basically, and slap their label on it and say this is reishi or this is
Right.
lion's mane or this is
Right.
whatever. So the number one thing I like to look out for is mycelium on grain versus fruiting body. So if the
Mm.
ingredients include, like if it says full spectrum, or if it includes, any kind of sterilized grain product as the main ingredient, then you know right away this is myceliated grain, and this might not give me the benefits that I'm looking for.
And
Um,
full spectrum is one of those red flag words.
Full spectrum to me is a red flag word because really what that means is, so for example, if you take a bag of grain spawn and you
Mm.
leave it long enough, eventually it will form like little primordial fruiting bodies.
Mm.
So like if I forget about grain spawn in the incubator for 3 weeks, I'll look at it and I'll see like, oh, there's a tiny little fruiting body in there. Technically it's a fruiting body, right? So if you grind that whole thing up, you can say, well, this contains the mycelium, it contains the fruiting body, it's the full spectrum. But really that doesn't mean anything. So full
Right.
spectrum, if you see that, it's kind of like you might want to look into it a little bit deeper because
Okay.
there's no real meaning behind that word.
Mm.
The other thing you want to look for is if the beneficial compounds are actually listed on the supplement facts table. So if you read the supplement facts table, if you put, 29% beta glucan or 2% triterpene, it needs to actually be in there, right? It needs to be tested by third-party labs and stuff like that. So if that is on the label, chances are it's a good product, right?
Okay.
So that's the other thing that you look for. You want to make sure you see those compounds actually listed on the label. Um, the other thing to look out for is if there's I've seen some products that are like 1,000 to 1 extraction ratio,
Mm.
um, which really makes no sense because how you calculate an extraction ratio is you take the bulk mass of mushrooms and how much like end product of extract you actually got out. So, for example, a reishi mushroom, it's pretty dense. So once you do the extraction and it's just alcohol and hot water extracted powder, it might be like a 8 to 1 or 16 to 1 ratio, and that doesn't change that much. But if it was 1,000 to 1 ratio, all that means is it took you way, way, way more mushrooms to get your extract, and it's just
Ah,
super inefficient. And nobody actually does that, right? So if you say it's 1,000 to 1, I mean, it's kind of meaningless. To the
right.
end consumer, it's like, oh, that seems really powerful. That must be the best stuff, right? But really high extraction ratios are just kind of, yeah. All it really means is that there was a bad extraction process, or either a faulty extraction process where you use way too many mushrooms, or they're just making stuff up. Um,
Right. So kind of
so
those
those
empty, it's like the empty buzzwords, right? That we see on so many products, full spectrum, 1,000 to 1. What was the other one you mentioned there? I can't remember what you just said, but yeah, it's or like maltodextrin, these fillers that it's like, well, why does that need to be in there, right? And then not
Right.
having the actual like beta glucans, beta glucans,
Yeah,
is that
beta
right?
glucan. Yeah, and we can talk
And
about what beta glucans
triterpenes.
are. I guess I didn't mention what that is, but
Yeah,
um,
yeah. And let's yeah, what is a beta glucan and why is it good for us?
yeah. So a beta glucan is kind of like it's the thing that kind of unites all medicinal mushrooms. Beta glucans are the compounds that are able to interact with and modulate our immune system.
Mm,
But beta glucan is technically it's just a polysaccharide, which is a fancy word for sugar, but it's a very special type of sugar. It's a sugar that's shaped in a very specific way that again is able to interact with our immune system. So you have alpha glucans, which are the sugars that are found in like potatoes and bread and easy to digest starch, and then you have the beta glucans, specifically fungal beta glucans, which are the harder to digest compounds that are found in mushrooms. And those are the compounds that are responsible for the immunomodulating properties of mushrooms.
mm, okay. Triterpenes.
Right. So triterpenes are the alcohol soluble component of mushrooms. And again, there's all sorts of different varieties or flavors of triterpenes. It's not like triterpene is just one compound. It's like a class of compounds.
Mm,
But these are the ones that are specifically responsible for some of the other effects, like for example, in reishi, triterpenes are the compound that's responsible for the kind of hypnotic or calming effects of the mushroom. So yeah, triterpenes are the other major class of compounds in medicinal mushrooms.
got it. Is there anything else going on in there that's important that we should know about?
I mean, there is lots, and that's the thing. Like, there's a huge amount of different compounds. I mean, the other one that's really interesting is called cordycepin, and
Mm,
that's a super unique compound that's found in Cordyceps mushroom. And Cordyceps mushroom is kind of known as the athlete's mushroom or the energy mushroom.
mm,
And cordycepin is it's an analog of adenosine.
mm,
And when you think of I don't want to, without getting too technical, but like the Krebs cycle and the energy producing aspects of our body producing ATP or adenosine triphosphate, cordyceps can actually play a part in that cycle, which is one of the reasons why people get the energy benefits from cordyceps.
oh, okay. And cordyceps are the ones they're quite difficult to grow, are they not?
Cordyceps can be a lot more difficult to cultivate. People have figured it out.
Right.
People can cultivate cordyceps en masse.
Hmm.
But that's another interesting red flag. And mushrooms, I mean, there's so many of these, but
Right.
there's two different types of cordyceps. There's Cordyceps sinensis and Cordyceps militaris. And
Ah,
people will call them both cordyceps without, really talking about the differences. But there is a major difference. Cordyceps sinensis is impossible to cultivate, and Cordyceps militaris is easy to cultivate. Luckily, Cordyceps militaris has a lot of amazing benefits and a lot of the same benefits as the original Cordyceps sinensis. But instead of costing, 20,000 kilograms per pound because, or sorry, $20,000 per kilogram because it only grows in a very specific region in Tibet and has to be harvested
right.
off worms and all this kind of stuff, you can actually grow it and cultivate it yourself, and it's relatively cheap to do.
Right. Yeah, that's is triggering my memory there from Fantastic Fungi. We were talking about the how the cordyceps are growing out of the heads of insects, and that's and that's how they use their host to like travel around and grow, which was an amazing intelligence that you see like some of these mushrooms have.
Yeah, I mean I'm endlessly fascinated by mushrooms. I'm glad I mentioned that documentary. So if anybody listening to this hasn't seen it yet, go watch it. It's on Netflix. It's called
Yeah.
Fantastic Fungi or Fantastic Fungi, depending on how you pronounce it. And yeah, it just goes through a lot of this really interesting information, such as mushrooms, turning bugs into zombies and eventually fruiting through their heads. It's
Yeah.
pretty darn cool.
Yeah, it's wild. And then one of the other amazing things in that documentary was the oyster mushroom experiment. Where was it? They took it and they were trying to figure out if oyster mushrooms could be a solution for cleaning up toxic waste. Is that correct?
Yeah, mushrooms are amazing mycoremediators or soil remediators. So I think the experiment you're talking about specifically, where they had like two piles of stuff, and they were covered in oil and
Mm.
like motor oil, I think it was, or some
Yeah.
sort of waste oil material. And one pile they just left, and the other one they inoculated with oyster mushroom mycelium. And
Mm.
the pile with oyster mushrooms, the mycelium started to grow. It eventually fruited, which brought in the birds and whatnot, which brought in the seeds and just like provided this little oasis of life. Whereas the other pile that didn't have the mushrooms was just kind of sitting there doing nothing, wasting away. And I mean, I hadn't, I didn't see that experiment myself, obviously, but I've seen oyster mushrooms growing on cigarette butts. I've seen them growing on pure motor oil. Trad Cotter, he's a mycologist from the US, and he does all these really cool experiments. And yeah, he trained a species of oyster mushroom to grow on 100% motor oil, which is
Huh.
crazy.
What do you mean he trained? What does that mean?
So he started with just growing the oyster mycelium out on an agar dish that had maybe 1% motor oil and 99% sugar with agar. And then he took the best performing part of that and put it on another dish that maybe had 10% motor oil and 90% sugar. And then he did that again where it was 50-50. And eventually he managed to get it to grow on 100% motor oil. And what that's telling us is the mushrooms are able to react to their environment and produce whatever it takes to be able to live off of those materials, and that's why they can also grow on cigarette butts. He does some other really cool stuff too, where he takes like Staphylococcus bacteria, for example, puts it on a
Uh-huh.
plate, and then on the other side he'll put some sort of mushroom mycelium, and the mushroom mycelium will grow, and when it runs into that bacteria, it will produce a specific antibiotic to that bacteria, and you can actually take that off, and then you have like a custom made antibiotic. So it's just kind of it's pretty sci-fi. Like I don't know how it's probably
Wow.
pretty far away from being like usable for humans or whatever, but like to have mushroom mycelium and fungi be able to create custom compounds to fight bacteria and other things, I mean, that's pretty cool.
That's amazing. Wow. Creatures. They're definitely
Creatures.
creatures. I understand the presence of like using mushrooms to say that, this is proof that aliens have been here because this is from somewhere else, right? Like when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, that's unbelievable. And then there was that one other amazing thing. I think this is a Paul Stamets product that he developed where, what was it? It was for like getting rid of termites in your home, right? And he did something with mushrooms there. There was a process where it sounds like he trained the mushroom to properly like infiltrate a help me out here. Is like,
Yeah, I know what you're
you
talking
know the
about. So
story.
he created a strain of cordyceps that had like a delayed
Cordyceps.
sporulation,
Right.
and what it would do is, so it attracted the worker ants or whatever, and they, instead of dying before they got back to the colony, they were infected, but it was delayed, and they were able to go back into the colony, go, infiltrate deep into the colony and go right up to the queen ant or however it works, and like
Mhm.
actually infect it. And once that died, then the whole colony would die.
Right.
So yeah, using mushrooms as a pesticide, I guess, with delayed sporulation properties, pretty darn cool. And there's endless examples of stuff like that. Like,
Hmm.
again, talking about Trad Cotter and some of the research that he's done, showing, protecting crops from all sorts of pests. And Paul Stamets has obviously done the work with the bees, using mushroom extracts to support their immune systems, and deal with the varroa mite. And so I think there is like endless applications for mushrooms. Um, Obviously, everywhere from the functional benefits to humans to the potential mental health benefits, and then benefits for the world and the environment. So
Right.
yeah, it's a real blue ocean of opportunity in mycology.
Yeah, and just like that base level of working with the food that we grow, right? As an alternative for pesticides is where I can see that to be like a massive um, benefit to us. So from what I know about pesticides as well, is you put pesticides in something and then you just kind of have to keep like upping the ante because super pests come out of that, right? And then you have to like change and you're making everything stronger and potentially more toxic for us, where mushrooms could be a solution for that.
Yeah, mushrooms have intelligence and they're
Yeah.
always evolving. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And is this something that, it's obviously being studied and worked on. I don't feel like there's really like mass adoption around the intelligence of mushrooms and like what their actual capabilities are. Like seeing that oyster mushroom thing, learning about them, being used as a treatment for different pests. Actually, my dad was having a weird ant problem at his house, and I was like, oh, I just watched Fantastic Fungi. Let me see if I can find this product here. And it was like almost impossible to find a supplier of this. And I was like, how is this not more readily available or known about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in the early adoption phase. And I will say too, like, although a lot of this stuff sounds amazing, especially in the microremediation space, it's still really early. So,
Right.
like, yeah, they showed you could put, there's potential to deal with oil spills using mushrooms, but
Mm,
to actually do that on a large
mass
scale,
scale.
like if you have a oil spill in the ocean or something, it's not like you're gonna just throw some oyster mushrooms in there and clean it up. So
Right.
I think like they see the potential is there. There's lots of really cool stuff that could be done, but the practical application of it, we're still so far away from that. Like you might have heard of like, there's a species of mushrooms that can technically eat plastic. It's like, is this a
Oh.
solution to our worldwide plastic problem? Well,
Mm,
not really, because like, yeah, it can eat plastic, but like it takes a really long time and it's only on a very small scale, and yet,
right.
these things still need to be developed. I
Yeah.
think some of the coolest things that we're seeing that actually have a lot of potential to have a more immediate impact on the world are things like, mycelium being used as a potentially meat replacement. So you're seeing companies like At Last and whatnot that are making like mycelium bacon or like other kind of things like
What?
that. You can grow meat. It's not technically meat, but it's mycelium, but it has a lot of similar properties.
Huh.
Mushroom materials are another really cool thing. Like I mean, this is basically just turkey tail that like turned into a brick.
Wow.
It never actually grew, but like people can actually make building materials, leather materials, all sorts of interesting properties, like a replacement for styrofoam, perhaps that uses
Right.
mycelium and sawdust. So that's the kind of thing where I think there's the most instantaneous promise.
Right.
Whereas cleaning up oil spills and solving the world's plastic problems, it's potential, but it might be further down the road.
Right. What is it? There's like Garbage Island in the Pacific there that's like three times the size of Texas or something, right? So can't really just throw some mushrooms at that and be like, go to work, guys.
Yeah,
Figure it out.
unfortunately not. Yeah.
Yeah, not quite yet. Uh, all right, and yeah, that's fascinating. So what? I guess it's all just about a scaling issue, right? When I think about potentially using mycelium to build a house, has anybody done that? Do you know of any
Like,
people that have actually like built walls, right? Because like
I
there's like there's hempcrete out there, right? Like I know that is has been found. What is it? Just like hemp, lime, and I think maybe like hay. It kind of becomes like a cob-like structure, but it's unbelievably insulating. So you don't really need like any exterior walls or anything. It can be like just that brick can be your wall of the home, right? That's insulation and has a bunch of other benefits as well, as far as not allowing pests or termites or anything to infiltrate. So is there anything like that in the mushroom world
Yeah, I
that you know
think
about?
I don't know how close we are. I think the closest would be probably Ecovative. So I know if people are super interested in this topic, look up Ecovative. I believe that's how you pronounce it, but they're kind of leading the charge in terms of mushroom materials. And I know they do have like building materials like bricks and stuff. I don't know if anyone's actually built a house and lived in it or whatever, but
Okay.
they have
I'll
this
have to do some
really
Googling.
cool technology where they grow what's called aerial mycelium. So
Mm,
they grow like these loafs of mycelium. I actually don't know how they do it. I don't think anybody outside of their circle knows how they do it. But they can slice that up and fold it into leather and cut it into bacon and like do all kinds of really cool stuff. So that's where a lot of the innovation is happening around that space. And I
okay.
think we're going to keep seeing it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. And that one company that you said, like um, the bacon, mycelial bacon, is that At Last? You said?
Yeah, it's at last, which I
Okay.
think was like a spin-off of Ecovative. I think
Okay.
they're part and parcel of the same company, but yeah,
Right on.
definitely check them out. I did do a video on this if anyone want to check it out on our YouTube channel. I did a video all about mushroom materials where we talk about this a little more in depth.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely, when we release this podcast to our newsletter in a couple weeks here, we'll put some links in there too to a few of your videos there, especially the one of like growing mushrooms at home out of that 5 gallon pail. I want to try that so bad.
That's
That's
awesome. You know,
that's
it's so
great.
funny. Like that video it kind of went like viral in a way. Like I don't know if
Yeah.
it's truly viral, but it went like semi-viral, and it was just amazing to see like how many people started growing mushrooms because of it. And it's just like I've seen so many 5 gallon bucket grows now. It warms my heart. Like honestly, I love to
Yeah.
see it. Like there's mushrooms everywhere. It's really cool.
Yeah. It's such a. I mean, there was a pressure cooker involved though too, right?
What not
From
with
my memory.
the not
Not
with
with
the
that one.
5 gallon bucket. You just need to get some wood chips literally from the pet store, soak them in hot water out of your tap, add the grain spawn in the bucket, and you're off to the races. So as long as
Oh,
you can buy grain spawn, yeah, you can't really make grain spawn without a pressure cooker, but you can
right.
easily buy it from various places. So that's all you need.
Yeah, I'm mixing up a few of your videos now in my head.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched a couple. Okay, there's one more mushroom that I really want to talk about. This is one that we had a guest on here recently, Thomas Hartle, who is the first Canadian to receive the Section 56 exemption for psilocybin therapy in Canada, and he was talking about some of the holistic treatments that he started taking or implementing into his healing practice when he was diagnosed back in 2016 with terminal cancer. And one of the big ones was turkey tail. And he kind of just immediately started taking super high dose turkey tail. And, we can't say for sure that the mushrooms are what's kind of like sustaining him and keeping him going. But, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer 5, 6 years ago, and he's still going. He feels good. He's doing some other like high dose vitamin therapy, but I believe he said he is taking like 6 grams, 6 to 8 grams of turkey tail and lion's mane daily. So
Wow.
what is turkey tail doing, and what are the studies showing about turkey tail and cancer
Yeah.
prevention and this like reducing and shrinking of tumors?
Yeah, I mean, obviously can't speak specifically to that because I mean there's so much unknown. But what I can tell you about turkey tail is that yeah, obviously a lot of people use it for supporting their immune system through all sorts of different things that they're dealing with, and it is a super powerful mushroom. I mean, I'm sure most of us might have seen the 6 ways that mushrooms can save the world by Paul Stamets, and he talks about
Hmm.
his mother's challenges with breast cancer and how she used turkey tail to support her health. I mean, that's an amazing story, and that's like one of hundreds that you hear, just like the story that you just told me. So, turkey tail is a very special mushroom. It includes a very high concentration of these fungal beta glucans. So,
Hmm.
hot water extracts of turkey tail are really high in fungal beta glucans. The highest out of any of the mushrooms that we have, and the highest out of any mushroom I think around. And it contains very special types of fungal beta glucans. So you can look into some of the research on this. There's PSP, which is polysaccharide peptide, and PSK, which is another version of this polysaccharide or this beta glucan. And that's where a lot of the research has been done around this. And not just in humans, by the way. There's been research done on turkey tail for dogs as well, for the same reasons that people can look into. Um, so the actual mechanism of action of why this might be the case, I'm not sure, to be honest, and I don't know if anybody's sure. They're still figuring it out, but there is
Yeah.
active research being done. It's one of the most researched mushrooms in the world. And again, I think it comes back down to the immunomodulating properties of mushrooms supporting your immune system. And I think once we realize that the immune system really is the foundation for our health. If you have
Right.
a crappy immune system, or if your immune system is malfunctioning, whether it's overreacting or underreacting, it's gonna, it's gonna cause issues. So I
Right.
think the immunomodulating properties of mushrooms can do so many things, and I think this is just one of those potential applications.
Right. So it could very well be that it's just getting our immune system to a point where it's, operating at such a high function that it's then just kind of taking care of that maybe a cancer that's in someone's body, right? And it's just working through it. It's a possibility. I mean, it's tough to say, but there's some amazing stuff coming out around people with cancer and with the
Yeah,
use of turkey tail.
yeah, and one thing I definitely recommend people look into if they're more interested in this topic and like the healing properties of mushrooms around that.
Mm.
There's a guy named Martin Powell. He's brilliant. He's also a personal friend. Like I think he's just absolutely brilliant. But he's really good with he's been studying mushrooms in traditional Chinese medicine for well over 20 years. He wrote a book called Medicinal Mushrooms: A Clinical Guide,
Mm.
which you can get on Amazon, and it goes through all the different types of mushrooms, the indications of them, how to use them. Also goes through a lot of the research and the studies that's being done and the results of those research. And he's also got a website called Mycology Press where you can go look, and it really accurately lays out, all the research that's being done on all of these different potential implications or indications. So if you're interested, I mean, obviously we can't offer like specific medical advice at FreshCap because
Yeah, of
it's
course.
best to talk to your natural health care
Yeah.
practitioner or your doctor
Yeah.
because the reason for that is because there's so many different things, right? Like it's
Yeah.
to take full holistic health into the equation. But if you're
Mm.
interested in learning, what is the research saying, I'd say go check out Mycology Press. It lists it out really accurately, and you can dig into the papers and see what you find.
Yeah, and it's great education to have too. To maybe if you're, looking to find a health practitioner or a doctor that you want to work with, right, for your holistic health, to educate yourself and then be able to ask more informed questions to your doctor, which is always kind of a fun game, I find. If you ask a doctor certain things, and they're
Yeah.
like, and they just have no idea about nutrition or functional medicine or anything, right? It's a good test to see, is this someone I want to work with on my health journey?
It's definitely a journey, yeah. And everybody's different too, right?
Totally.
So it really depends.
Yeah. So the farms that you're working with in China and Russia, you mentioned that you have visited some of them, correct?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah. I've had them
Yeah.
all and visited them, and yeah, it's amazing, like beyond amazing.
Yeah. And so when did you, was that part of, because that's an amazing thing to do for a business. I love that you guys have actually, gone overseas and been on the grounds. I think there's like an initial reaction for a lot of Canadians and Americans about buying things from China, right?
Yeah, yeah.
There's kind of that thought of, I don't really know what's going on over there. I've heard a lot of bad stuff about labor issues and facilities and just like cleanliness, and do I want to put this in my body? So what did you see when you went over there? Like describe kind of the facilities and the experience.
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, off the bat, that that hesitation that people have is totally warranted because I will
Mm,
say, like, you can get really crappy supplements from China. You can get really crappy supplements from the US or from Canada.
yes.
So, like, there's so many things to take into the equation. And yeah, the perception is that, it's super industrial and maybe they don't have all the, like, how do you know, right? And
Right.
when you go there, I mean, yeah, there's big industrial cities in China, but where mushrooms grow is in the mountainous regions. And like
Mm,
that's not just like marketing speak. I know some companies are like, yeah, it's grown deep in the mountains, but like that is actually true. you drive for hours and hours into the mountains, and it's pristine. And these mushrooms are grown naturally and organically without the use of chemicals, without the use of pesticides, because you just don't need to use any of that stuff. So reishi, for example, it grows on logs. So they take pure oak logs, they inoculate it with reishi, they have them in these beautiful greenhouses and shade houses, and they grow outside and they grow with the seasons. And I think that's the other thing that people don't realize necessarily with mushrooms that are grown overseas is they're not grown in condensed periods indoors like you would do it if you were to do it in North America. They're grown in naturally with the seasons outdoors. So like reishi is harvested in the summer because that's when it grows the best. Lion's mane, maitake, they're harvested in September, October, which is when the harvest is, and they're all grown outdoors in natural light, natural air, natural environments without the use of chemicals or pesticides. The only exception is cordyceps, which grows indoors in controlled facilities because it requires cooler temperatures and a bit of a different life cycle. But again, mushrooms are certified USDA organic. And the other best thing about that is, I would love to just trust our suppliers. I mean, we've developed long-term relationships over multiple years with these people, but you still, no matter what, you still can't just trust it. So what we do is a multitude of internal testing and third-party testing. So we test for heavy metals, we test for ID for the beneficial compounds like beta-glucans and triterpenes. We also test for pesticides. And because we say, gluten-free and dairy, like we also test for gluten, dairy, and the other major allergens. So that's the best thing is you can test for these products, and also that they're USDA certified organic and all that kind of stuff. So really is like my ethos with FreshCap has always been from day one. I want people to benefit from these mushrooms, and the way that's going to happen is if we find the best mushrooms in the world. So we go and we find the best mushrooms in the world. If the best mushrooms in the world were grown in Southern California, that's where I would go get them. If it was, if it was grown in Eastern Canada, that's where I would go get them. Yeah. The best mushrooms in the world are grown in Southeast China, so that's where we get them, and that's where we go. And we are super serious about quality, and that's why we have all of these things in place to make sure that it is quality. And that's our ethos.
Well, I'm sold. I will 100% buy and use your products, man. That's an amazing philosophy to have in business, and it's just so refreshing and great to hear like how in touch you are with your original core product and its supply chain. And we talked a little bit earlier about how it's a fairly unregulated market, right? The mushroom supplement industry. I have no idea what I just bought from this bulk food company now. But I have a feeling that it might not be what I am actually looking for. So it's great to see that you're doing all the steps. Like you're not being forced to do all these regulatory processes, but you're just doing it anyways because it's important to you. So
and I think too, it's it's important to me obviously from a moral and quality perspective. Like I really do just like I'm super into mushrooms, right? I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I was like selling something I didn't 100% believe in, use myself, use with my family, the whole thing. But also, I mean, I think long-term, it's just good business, right? If you have really good products that people benefit from and people are going to want to use again, I mean, that's going to be great long-term. Whereas if you try to short circuit that whole process, sell people maltodextrin or like question mark mystery mushroom, then that's not, might be a short-term benefit, but it's not going to have any long-term staying power. And FreshCap, we want to be around for a long time.
Awesome, man. Yeah, you might catch a little bit of a placebo effect with people, right? They think but after a while, you're not really actually providing any good and people figure it out, and there goes your business, right?
Exactly.
And your morality and ethics, everything out the window.
Exactly.
Right. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned earlier too, the hub that you're in Edmonton there, and you're saying that that psilocybin has been psilocybin grows around there have been big. What are you kind of seeing in the psilocybin world over there where you are?
Yeah, so in Canada, well, as you know, because you're from Victoria, I mean, it's going a little bit crazy here. I mean, there's obviously a huge amount of investment coming into the psychedelic space as a whole, but psilocybin in particular, and that comes with good things and bad things. Obviously, I think there's a lot of malice, not necessarily malice, but like a lot of pump and dump kind of going on, and a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
things going on. But there's also some really cool things happening too. And one of the things that's going to be happening in Edmonton, and I'm not involved in this, so I don't know all the details. I'm just telling you from what I've been reading and stuff like that. There is going to be a massive facility in Edmonton for growing psilocybin mushrooms, and also for potentially treating people with these products. Now, again, that's a legal gray area, so even the people who are funding this and behind it, like, they can't be sure
Right.
how this is going to unroll, like what the actual legal framework is going to look like. But in the meantime, people are going through that process of getting their licenses to grow these
Yeah.
materials and research them and study them. And to me, I just think that's amazing. I mean, to see
Mm.
that happening right now is, again, I've been interested in mushrooms my whole life. I never would have thought that in, 2021 would be having these kind of conversations. But I think
Yeah.
it's really cool because if it's going to make the world a healthier and happier place, like, how could you not get behind that? And I think what not only the history and the anecdotal experiences are saying, but also what the research is saying, it's showing that it might make the world a healthier and happier place. I'll give you an example.
Mm.
Just yesterday, maybe it was 2 days ago now, we heard about Johns Hopkins getting the first grant for psilocybin research in
Yep.
50 years. And the research is based on smoking cessation using
Hmm.
psilocybin mushrooms. And it was based on a pilot study that they did where they took 15 people, it was only 15 people, but they researched, using psilocybin to help people stop smoking. And after 6 months, 80% of the people in that study had quit smoking.
Hmm.
And when you think about that, I mean, that's mind blowing. Like, how hard, like, smoking is one of the most, nicotine is one of the most addictive drugs, the most
Hmm.
harmful chemicals in all of society. And, you know, a humble little brown mushroom might be used to help people quit smoking. And you ask yourself, why? How does that work, right? Is it
Exactly.
because it's causing people to self-reflect and realize the impact of their actions
Hmm.
on their body and on society? Um, I don't know, maybe. And if that is the case, do you think of all the other implications, right, that it could
Yeah.
potentially have, not just smoking cessation, but all sorts of addictions and
Hmm.
um, it's pretty credible. So, I mean, I kind of rambled on there, but it's amazing to see all of this stuff happening right now, and it's exciting to see where it's going to end up.
Yeah. That I know the study that you're referring to, that 2016 John Hopkins study with the 15 people that went through there. And one woman has a really interesting story. You just mentioned that is it changing the way that they think about themselves as like an addict to nicotine? And that's exactly what she described. And this is just really fascinating because anybody that's watched someone go through a smoking addiction or quitting smoking or has done it themselves knows like what that demon that they're dealing with and how powerful it is. And what this woman experienced is during her psilocybin therapy experience, she disconnected from herself and saw uh, like the smoking version of herself, right? So she had like this kind of objective viewpoint to see that alternative person that she didn't really feel connected to in that moment. And she saw it as this like, I was just this little Gollum character, like hiding in the shadows, hunched over, smoking my cigarettes. And
Yep.
she just really didn't like that image. She was like, ugh. And she was kind of just like, I don't want to do that anymore. And she was one of the ones I think that got through in the stats of the 1 year mark, and 68% of people had still not smoked, which is an unbelievable number from one or two psilocybin therapy sessions, which is like it's like a couple days of therapy, right?
Yeah, that's the
And
thing.
you
And
get someone like breaking the habit, like that's unbelievable. So just to hear that story that she kind of she got to step outside of herself, see herself as something that disconnected from her addiction and saw it as this like, oh, this addiction is not me, it's something that is different and I don't want to associate with that anymore. So she uses that every time she gets the craving to smoke. That's the first thing that pops into her head, is that image of the creepy little character that's addicted to smoking, that's sad and is like doing something that's really unhealthy, and she's like, I want to be healthy, I don't want to do that anymore.
yeah,
That's
I
amazing.
mean, it's just amazing to see, and that's like, that's obviously one little study. But the cool thing about mushrooms in particular, it's like, it's not like these are a new drug that was just discovered in 2021 or
Right.
2015. It's like it's been around for a long time. And
Yeah.
so I think, a lot of these studies are going to be done, but we already kind of know what the results are going to be. Maybe it will be different with the framework of our society as it is now. Like I don't think culturally we're kind of ready for like rolling out, psilocybin therapy. Obviously not my area of expertise, but like it doesn't feel like we're able to fully be able to integrate that. And like, how can somebody have a life-changing moment on Saturday and then go to work on Monday morning kind of thing? Like it's,
Right.
it's a little bit difficult, but I think, as we're starting to figure that out, and figure out like how we can actually use these amazing compounds and natural materials to help people with all sorts of problems. It's not just the mushroom, right? Like you said, the psilocybin therapy. It's the process, right? It's
Hmm.
the people that are training you through it. It's the integration.
Yeah.
It's all that kind of stuff. So that's the other important thing that I think we're going to need to figure out over the next few years.
Yeah, it's just a tool, the way I see it, right? Like it's a highly effective tool, but the right structures and practice and environment need to be put in place. Similar to what you were saying about turkey tail, right? It's like it just gets your immune system operating at a function that's tuned, it's high level, it's doing what it needs to do, and then your immune system is able to respond to whatever's going on inside of your body, right? So, but I mean, you can't just like be taking turkey tail and then putting a bunch of shit in your body at the same time, right? Like you could,
Exactly.
but it's everything is about like a holistic approach of just like an overall like awareness and lifestyle change towards your health journey.
It's so true. And I tell people that too, like if you're not sleeping right, if you're not drinking water, if you're not like exercising, like mushrooms aren't going to have the same impact. But like if you're doing all these other things and you
Right.
want the extra benefit, like that's where it's all part of a holistic treatment. And it's the same
Right.
with, psilocybin therapy and everything else.
Yeah. Nothing's a magic pill, I think is the biggest thing to take home, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you wanna tell us? I blown my head's exploding from everything I've learned from you, man. Like it's so cool to speak to someone, and even on your website, a self-professed mushroom nerd. I love getting nerdy about stuff,
Yeah.
and this has been amazing, and I think all of our listeners could agree. But what else do you want to tell us before we sign off here?
No, I think that's good. I mean, like obviously, yeah, I'm super excited about mushrooms. I think there's so much amazing potential, not just in the functional mushroom space, which is what we specialize in, but everything that we talked about. I mean, mushrooms is a platform for holistic wellness of humans, of our bodies, our minds, and also the earth. I mean, it's just endless. And without getting too woo-woo, it's like really like we should be paying a lot more attention to mushrooms, and that's why I'm excited with things that like what you guys are doing at the Daily Mushroom, like teaching people about mushrooms, getting people on a newsletter so they can constantly
Yeah.
be reminded about all the cool stuff that's happening. I think it's gonna blow people's minds over the next few years how important mushrooms are gonna be. They've always been important, but we just haven't
Hmm.
realized it yet. So once we start to realize that, I think it's gonna be like a no-brainer. So I'm excited about mushrooms. I think everybody listening should be excited about mushrooms, and yeah, happy to share the magic of it.
Amazing. And just before we go here, your website, just FreshCap for everyone. Just tell us what it is.
Yeah, so our website is freshcap.com. If you want to reach out to us, support freshcap.com. Also, we're really active on Instagram and on YouTube. So check out our YouTube channel, just youtube.com/freshcapmushrooms. And yeah, that's where you can reach out and connect with us. And we're always happy to make the connection and meet other mycophiles.
Yeah, and Lyco Files. I love that. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for chatting with us today, Tony. And I can't wait to just stay tuned in and follow along with the Fresh Cap journey. And I will continue to learn from your YouTube channel like I have. So keep putting out that amazing content and spreading the mushroom love.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Brett. And yeah, happy to do it.
Awesome, man. Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
And stopping.